All right, what's going on? Another show, the Research to Reps Roundtable. I'm so fired up because it's been a while since we've recorded a show, and we have a very, very special guest with us. But before we get to that, I want to get to our co-host. So first up, I want to say, Dr. Ernie Reimer, what's going on? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. At this time of year, I'm always going to be talking about football season. I'm going to be talking about baseball season. We're still full steam ahead with men's baseball, kids baseball, and all of our fall sports at U of L have started their competition or are about to get started this weekend. So things are buzzing and exciting. How about you, Dr. Ted?
Oh, doing great. Yeah, getting ready for the college football season to kick off, and next week the NFL. So all's good. And Ernie, how did your baseball team do this year?
We're doing well. We're wrapping up the regular season. The playoffs are about to begin. So my 18 and plus team is going in as the second place team, and my 40 plus team, we started out 0-5, but since then we are 10-4, and so we really turned things around since the start, and we're about to start the playoffs there. But what I will say is that my son Max, 6-year-old, he just had his first ever travel baseball tournament in the 8U, and they won the whole damn thing, and the coaches voted him tournament MVP. So we got a little ball player coming up in the house.
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, great to hear you guys. So we're going to get to our special guest here. I'm a little bit intrigued to know why he doesn't have a better backdrop. I mean, when you come from the Ohio State, and I've been trained to say I'll have an Ohio State grad here coming up in December, and she has taught me that, Dad, it's the Ohio State. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Paul Jones. What's going on, Paul?
Thank you. Not much. Enjoying the sunshine, enjoying the beautiful weather here. I think you're right. We could have picked a better location and backdrop. We have plenty to choose from here at Ohio State. Yeah, I think there's something to highlighting your roots and where you came from. And back when I was at the University of Louisville, my office used to be in a storage closet, and that's kind of where I've returned to. So
yeah, I was going to say, I mean, there was a little while in there when we were together where you had made a homemade desk in a storage room. And so I feel like those were beginnings, and now you have new beginnings. So maybe the storage room background is fitting for the moment.
I think it is. I think it is. I think it ties. You know what? It keeps me humble. I don't want to get above my raisin.
That's good. This is a full circle moment because, Ted, you've got roots there at the Ohio State as well, don't you?
Yes, several decades ago. But no, it's interesting to see the progress that they've made in the area of sports science there at OSU, and the stuff that Paul and his crew there are doing is really exciting, and I'm sure he'll go into more detail on some of the projects they're working on.
Ted, go ahead and start us off with the question for Paul.
Okay, Paul, what was your biggest challenge going to Ohio State?
Wow, that's an excellent question. A lot of times, Ted, I think the challenge for me was scope. The University of Louisville, I was blessed to work with 7 teams and get to know those coaches really, really well. Out of I believe 21, 19 teams, depending on who you ask, and whether you count indoor and outdoor track as 2 separate teams. I believe we have about 19, 21. Here we have 39 opportunities each year, 36 varsity sports, 39 opportunities for championships. So to just be able to scale the work that you're doing is quite a process. And it's not always cut and dry. I think, something that worked there may not work here. So you really have to understand the context and the environment. And Ted, I think that's a pretty interesting question. And I think you probably are very versed in that and working with the multitude of professional teams that you work with. Can you kind of tell us about a time when, you tried it over here, but maybe it didn't work over there, or it did translate directly?
Oh, no, I think, that happens quite frequently. And it's just a question of, once you start some dialogue with people, then you figure out, no, that's not going to work, good, bad, or indifferent. But yeah, to your point, each situation is unique and different, and you have to adjust. Because sometimes your plan may not be the plan, and you've got to change your plan on the fly, so to speak.
When you talk about plans, Ernie, you've instituted a really good sports science department, but you had to do a lot of education on what sports science is. And there was a point in time when you were here, Paul, you were a part of that process and educating people on what sports science is. So talk a little bit about that process, Ernie, and then Paul, I want you to kind of follow up and maybe fill in some blanks from Ernie.
Well, I think the first thing is a valuable lesson is when you walk in, you can't walk in with expectations about how things should be run or how people told you things are running. And you can't walk in saying, okay, this is how we were doing things at one place, and I'm expecting things to occur this way. So the big valuable lesson learned is you really come in and you're kind of assessing where are we with everything. And in some areas it might be we're way behind even the starting point where I was, say, at my previous place. So we can't pick up where we left off. We've got a lot of work to do. And then in some areas you might identify, well, we're way far ahead. So I think you come in and you have to assess that. But probably for me, I think I was kind of coming in thinking we were going to be able to fast track a lot of things because I had expectations. And what I learned is that you only get to fast track the things that are important to those around you. And those may not be the same things you were doing. Those may not be the same problems you were solving at your previous place. And so, over the course of time, with educating people on sports science, when I came in, it faced something that I just had never witnessed before. University of Louisville was really far ahead in wearable tech from where we were at University of Utah. And so that had created this impression that sports science is just wearable tech. It's just it's the thingies on people's backs. That's all it is. And so we're at 3 years now, and I do believe people are starting to recognize that it's not just the thingies on our backs anymore. But it's taken a lot of time, a lot of patience, and just growing the staff and then sending the staff out into the wild so that coaches, athletes, and support staff can start to see that it's more than just one piece of technology. So what about you, Paul? I think you're coming through your 1-year anniversary here, and maybe what are some of the lessons learned for you between going from Louisville to the Ohio State?
Well, Ernie, I know you're a baseball fan, and I think you just hit a home run with that statement, right? So coming from the University of Louisville, had an extensive background, so had been running Catapult with them since 2016. They'd had it since 2015. Like, they were an early adopter of the use of Catapult technology in women's basketball, and a host of other sports. And to come to a school that's only been using it 2 years, and to be honest, like, I'll be really transparent here. I tried to just, force a lot of evolution really quickly. And then there were other areas that we have here in terms of technology utilization or just general practice that I wasn't as versed in. Like, we have 400 something Aura rings on our campus, and that's just something we didn't have access to at the University of Louisville. So what I found was, you get really far out ahead of the pack in some areas, and you kind of turn around and look and see that you have these other areas that are weakness. And what I had to do is really humble myself and say, hey, okay, who's the resident expert here with Oura Ring and sleep data? And Josh Hagan is an excellent resource for that. And Emily Botany, incredible resources. And so I had to humble myself in front of the crew and say, hey, I don't know as much about this. Could you inform me? Could you help me understand a little bit better? What's the research that we've produced? And like, how can I catch up to you all in this area? Which in turn creates this kind of give and take, this relationship of, okay, he's willing to humble himself in this area. Maybe I can humble myself in this area, and we can both cover ground together. And Pat, you've been in a multiple institutions now. That transition is pretty difficult. How have you found the best way to create relationships early on so that you can advance kind of your ideas and what you want to do at a new institution?
That's a good question, Paul. I think you can tell early on who really wants to engage with you. And those are, that's low-hanging fruit. You can build those relationships relatively easy because they're willing to meet you halfway. Some are willing to come further than halfway to meet you. And so you have those people that, that's who they are. And then you have those that are further away. And how do you get to those people? How do you figure out what matters to them and what they're looking for? So you have to ask these power questions. You have to ask them, what are you looking for? What are you missing? What questions do you want answered? You have to develop that relationship with them. Some you're going to have to go to dinner with, you got to go to lunch with, you got to grab some coffee with. You may have to show up at their team events and practices, and maybe an event at their house, and they see that you're invested and you're very intrigued in what they're doing. You're bought in, and that's how you can make progress. So it's always different. You have to kind of keep this running chart of where you are with everyone that you need to be engaged with, and how can you build those different synergies with different people, and get people saying, hey, I like that Paul guy. I like that Pat guy, that Ernie, that Ted guy. I like them. There's something about them that I think they can help me some kind of way. And then you just grow from there. And I think it's just important. You mentioned the word humility. That is such a hard thing for some people to navigate, because sometimes people humble themselves so much it takes away their confidence. It's like, I've humbled myself so much, I'm no longer confident. Like, that's a real thing. And we're talking about the Research to Reps Roundtable here. And we're talking about how we can take science to practical application. Well, that's not an easy transition. It's not an easy transition for people to go, okay, well, that was done in some lab with some data, with some numbers genius. Well, that doesn't work for me in the real world, in the real life. And I can see it with my eyes. And I know about, you might know about the science, but I know about the art, and I've been doing it for a couple of decades. Like, it's not an easy thing to bring these two things together. And I think that's why I appreciate what we're trying to do here. And but I'm going to kick it back to Ernie, because I know he had a question for you that's going to take us a little bit deeper.
Well, it's pretty easy, Paul. Like, you were starting in on your PhD when you were at Louisville, and you had to kind of scrap that, and now you're starting again. So I'd be curious to know, like, getting into the research, like, what kind of work are you thinking about with regard to your PhD now that you're in a different program there? And where do you think that program is going to lead you to the research you do for your dissertation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I thought about, I'll relate this to something else. Ernie, you brought up earlier about how you're competing in adult baseball. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to get back into jujitsu. For those of you that can't see the ear because it's covered up by these headphones, like, I used to grapple quite a bit about the time I was in the military. And I've contemplated this and going back to jujitsu. Like, do I try to start back at the belt that I was at before, or do I just humble myself and say, I'm a white belt, I'm a blank canvas, kind of pour into me and really, like, harp back on that or go back to that humility piece. And that's the strategy that I've kind of taken here. So at the University of Louisville, I was really interested in how we make decisions, right? We understand that there's a lot of cognitive bias when we enter numbers or numerical values into any decision-making process. And there's a lot of bias when we talk about sport. And those two things happen to intersect at every collegiate institution and every professional environment in sport. It's part of it. Money is part of this game. So how can we rationally make decisions when we also are this highly identified fan? So I wanted to understand how we make decisions, specifically numerical based decisions, when it comes to highly identified fans. And I was going to study that through highly identified fan wagering tendencies. And there's quite a bit of those. We don't necessarily have to go into those. But I think the way that I've kind of approached like starting the dissertation over again, if you will, here is that I want to be open. I think I was a little bit too narrow-minded when I came into my PhD at the University of Louisville. I had a really strong idea of what I wanted to do in typical Paul Jones fashion. I knew exactly what I was going to do, but the environment dictated something else when I had to transfer. And so not many people get a second chance to get another first day, right? Like you only typically get one first day, but I was lucky enough to get, to be able to start over again. So I think I'm going to leave all doors open and let my chair and my faculty committee really pour into me and try to understand what holes were in my rationale before, and maybe how can that evolve and go in a different direction. So I know that's probably a vague answer, one that you don't want to hear, but I guess undecided and still seeking and searching for new knowledge. And I guess, yeah, man, we have the amount of respect for the people on this call right now is so immense. All of you have gone through that rigorous process of publishing a dissertation and going through all the review steps. Pat, I would be really interested. You were at the height of your profession, SEC, Director of Strength and Conditioning for Missouri football, a team, by the way, that was absolutely killing it at the time. Some incredible players coming out of that program. And you said that you wanted to humble yourself and go back and get a PhD. What motivated that decision? It would have been easy to stay and just keep doing what you're doing. What motivated you to make that decision?
I think having a growth mindset and being part of creating an environment where we're learning and growing and bringing that information back and applying that information. That was a part of the culture. And whether it was, okay, we need to grow in nutrition, who's going to do it? We need to grow in the area of research and velocity-based training and force production, who's going to do it? We need to grow in the area of massage therapy and soft tissue work and physical therapy. Who's going to jump in and do it? And so we had people on staff, whether it was Jenna Heitmeyer, Brian Mann, Andrew Paul, many others that went back to school to bring that information back to the staff. And it just became apparent that one of the areas that I was passionate about was the mental side of the game. I had a mentor right there, and I was going to that mentor for years. Over a decade. And eventually he got to the point and said, we teach this in class. It's like, yeah, I do, but I don't need to go to class. I just have you. And eventually I end up taking a class. And for me, if I start something, I'm going to finish it. And that class was going to lead to a PhD. It just so happened to be something I was really passionate about, but it was to answer questions that my athletes were asking. Like, coach, you tell us to get our minds right, but how do we do it? It's like, you just do it. Like, just decide you're going to do it. And eventually I learned that no, there's a science to that. There's a science to getting your mind right. There's a science to mental performance and focus. And I realized that if we had that piece and we added it to the research and the velocity-based training and the physical therapy and the sports nutrition and all of the other things we were doing, that we could probably complete the puzzle in terms of ultimate performance. So for me, it wasn't just about me, because I actually said I would never go back and I would never get a PhD, because I saw my wife go through the process. I was like, that is just crazy. Why would anyone want to do something like that? But in order to grow and to go to where I need to get, go in the direction I needed to get to the place I was trying to get to, I was trying to be the best coach I could be, the most complete coach. And it just so happened I had to go to a classroom to do that. So I will pass it over to Ted, because Ted decided to get a PhD probably when there weren't many examples. And I'm not trying to say Ted is I'm Ted, I'm saying you're ahead of your time. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, it was at that time you did it just to go into teaching.
Yeah.
So that was at that point in time, and very fortunate there. You had the two guys that wrote one of the first exercise physiology texts, Fox and Matthews. So it was a unique opportunity to learn under those two, and at the same time be able to apply working with the athletic programs at the same time, because you'd sit there and take a lecture and you go, okay, and then go over to the facility and start training some of the teams. You're going, that's not going to work in an applied setting. So yeah, it was a unique time. I think there's probably more application now from the studies and to the athletic teams than there was then. But Paul, in terms of you said there's 39 opportunities for championships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Has there been one team or sport that you hadn't worked with that you've learned a lot from just observing practices?
Yes, I think almost all of them. Yeah, sure. But wrestling as a team, you'd think coming from a grappling background that like, well, shouldn't you know this? Should be like a fish in water at this. And it was completely different than from what I expected. And to sit and learn from Kevin Intromeyer, just an incredible strength and conditioning coach and sports scientist, a guy that like straddles that line like really, really well. And to understand, the weight descent and how much that has implications for every part of the athlete's game, and to understand more about metabolic gas exchange and understanding like what is truly going on physiologically, how we can improve that. We were lucky enough that we have some connections. The Blocko has an amazingly large network, and we were able to pull over a pre-existing VO2 max test. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, there is someone on this call that had to develop one from scratch. And I think that fits in well because we were talking about translating research to reps earlier. So, Ernie, do you have any experience with creating your own VO2 max test using gas exchange in the field?
Well, no, I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to. I do have a lot of use with like using oxygen and gases in the field, but not necessarily create my own VO2 test in the field.
Okay. All right.
So, unless it's something I forgot about and that you remember
Okay.
specifically, and I'm missing here.
No, I thought I remembered a story about University of Utah and a certain like VO2 max treadmill based test that you had instituted with one of the teams there.
Yeah, we definitely did, but I don't necessarily think we use the research to support the development of that protocol. Yeah, so we did a graded exercise protocol, and there was one particular team, our men's basketball team, and we were pretty religious with doing our physiology testing with them, and we had a player who ended up being a #1 draft pick in the NBA, and to see where he was when he came in, came in as a recruit. He was not eligible. He was allowed to start taking classes, but he wasn't eligible yet to participate with the team, and just see where he was with his physiology at that point from the time he got drafted to the NBA. It was just remarkable improvements. So it was really cool. But yeah, so as far as the protocol goes, what all we did was we created a ramp protocol that was based on speed rather than using grade, and that way we could use the speeds from the tests and the metabolic markers from the Metcart and stuff to help determine our different conditioning zones straight from the physiology test. And so
that's an interesting application. You know, some of our groups here, some of our teams are very blessed with their operating budget, and they can afford things like gas exchange cards, met cards. But we recently had to do something very similar when it came to our rowing organization. I think it was an awesome kind of tie back into this conversation, because the new coaching staff had come in and said, hey, like, this is what we're really after. We're chasing more dedicated, more precise heart rate training zones. Like, is there a way to do that? And I don't know the answer. I could probably come up with a decent guess, but it started by going back into the literature and reading and doing a large review over, are there any field-based VO2 max tests for rowing specifically, and then adapted a sound file in order to standardize this in their practice, and then kind of embed that within their program. So it sounds like something very similar was going on there. I wondered, Ted, I think you probably have 100 examples of this, of, you know, you talked about it just before, where maybe the research doesn't quite fit in the field. How do you work with other organizations to help them translate this research? Because sometimes it is abstract, sometimes it is hard to fit into a culture or an organization.
Well, I'll just, here's an example with, say, within the last 3 weeks with training camp starting, is, you know, you have some teams that, you know, are monitoring heart rate, you know, during football practices. And let's just say you look at the trim score. The one thing you have to take into consideration is, what was the heat index that day? Because, you know, you're looking at 1 point, but you have tremendous sweat rates. You've got more blood flow going to the surface of the skin, vasodilation to help, you know, evaporate and cool. You have less blood flow going to the muscles. You have less venous return. So stroke volume decreases, heart rate goes up. And so are we really looking at a training effect, or are we looking at a response to the heat and the humidity? So the one thing is to I think, get teams, when they look at workloads from a practice, is what was the environmental workload on top of the external factors we're looking at? And then the other thing that will influence that trim score is, that's probably the part of the season where you have the highest cognitive load. So what are the effects? And you look at some of the research on cognitive load on heart rate response. So sometimes we're just not looking at a training response. We've got a cognitive load, we have an environmental load, and then we have the actual football practice. So I think sometimes, you know, it's not just cut and dry when we look at, hey, this is what their heart rate was, and you have to ask, you know, why? You know, why was it that for that practice? And Ernie, I know you've got a lot of experience working with, you know, sports with different environmental aspects. How have you communicated that to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, because that's actually been one of, like, the X factors that I've been able to bring to the college athletics environment, both at Utah and at Louisville, is having worked with the US ski team. And so you get you start to dive into the physiology of altitude and travel and all these factors, and now you start to think in terms of, how does the environment affect performance? And then obviously when you are in your, you know, your fall sports, you're always thinking about heat stress mitigation and stuff. And so I think, like, there's a wealth of research on this stuff, and learning how to just truly apply it, like, go to the research and then say, okay, like, how do we make this, like, fit into the real world. And I can give a number of examples from just the recent weeks, and including today for that matter. And like one example would be with with us adding some former Pac-12 teams to the ACC on the West Coast. We have done a review of literature for the effect of domestic travel and crossing time zones, and in particular going from East and playing prime time in the West. And we did a lit review on that and learned that the team going from the East to the West has a significant disadvantage when they're playing at prime time, and that we found studies in Major League Baseball, NHL, the NBA, football, and Major League Soccer that showed similar effects. We also learned that when you come back, if you don't manage your travel logistics the right way, it could have a performance decrement. And so what we did was where we first applied this, and this is sometimes maybe goes back to Pat's question on how you can like show how sports science can have value, is we actually produced an educational video for the pro soccer teams we have in town, Racing Lou and Lou City, because my employer, U of L Health, it now has a sports medicine performance contract with them. And so I'm director of sports science of athletics, but kind of the sports science hat for those programs too. So we created the videos for them, and we've actually implemented some of those strategies with their teams going to the West. But we just shared those videos with a few people in athletics, and all of a sudden they're saying, hey, how should we do our travel to Stanford and stuff? And it's been really fascinating to just bring this this physiological lens on how environmental effects or travel can affect performance. The other thing that's really interesting is just today we got a question about a team who's going to be traveling and playing at what I would call moderate altitude, about 1,400 meters maybe. And the question was, do we travel 2 days before the event like we normally do? Or do we travel 1 day before? And I just needed to brush up on the research. So our applied epidemiologist and we dove in. We actually literally spent this afternoon diving in, and we actually found research that, and this is again for the pro soccer teams, but we found research that suggested this is common practice, that when an elite soccer team goes to altitude, they'll travel the day before. And what's starting to happen is the limitation is that your dehydration is most heavily affected when you first go into a higher altitude, and your sleep is disrupted and your mood state is disrupted in that first kind of 24 hours. So now they're starting to travel to a low altitude location, stay the night there, and then they will travel to the high altitude site within hours. So that's what the research is even reporting. This sounds like it's common practice. But so far in our lit review, what it's saying is that the more time you spend at altitude, the better effect it will have on your performance. So the aha moment, we literally did this instant expert exercise. Paul Mintley, our applied epidemiologist, and I dove in 1 hour each. We put 2 hours into review of lit. We're using AI to help us do that review. And we were like, whoa, this is cool. So it's really common practice to travel the day before or go the day of, but the actual research is suggesting that that would not be beneficial. So I guess my question for you, Ted, because you get to interact with a lot of different people and teams, would be, where do you encounter these like methodologies that would be considered to be common practice, somewhat pseudoscience, when in fact the actual research doesn't support the methodology?
Well, it's interesting because sometimes you walk a fine line, because you might meet with a team and they're engaging in something that's sort of maybe pseudoscience, but they may have a minority owner of the team who is an investor in that particular product. So you just probably stop right there, just because of that situation. And that happens probably more often than you think. Is that you're doing what? Well, our one minority owner is the majority owner of a company that does X, and so it's probably not worth getting in a discussion over that. But in some of the stuff, like, we go back. I mean, this would have been late 70s, early 80s, where, you'd have people that would, tape a nickel to somebody's muscle to hope to say that would help stop their cramps. What are you doing? Well, the coach said that's what, when he was a player, that they did. So you go, well, that's sort of silly, but and now, Paul, with the wrestlers, have you ever heard that they'll go upside down before they weigh in?
I have not heard that. I have heard of and I have participated in a lot of I think sometimes that those misconceived notions can be pretty innocent in nature. I don't know how much a nickel hurts our performance. It certainly doesn't help it, but it probably doesn't hurt it. I have participated in things that don't necessarily hurt my performance, but I have definitely participated in some weight cutting measures myself that definitely hurt my performance. I would say that the athletes here do a pretty good job. They're well informed on like how they should do this. The NCAA, to its credit, has created an environment where it's just not as possible to do some of those old things. But I think, and that's really what I would love to learn from the wisdom of this group here is, a lot of times so far we've been talking about like educating out towards coaches and athletes, but Pat, you had mentioned earlier, and Ernie, you mentioned too, of like changing preconceived notions, of changing the mind of people, especially ingrained habits that have gone on in an organization for a while. I'd be really interested to hear from the group on like how you approach those, and how do you get people to change things that have been established for a long time, because that the performance is going to increase if you do change.
I do have some experience with that, and it is not easy, even with a trusting relationship. At Missouri, Gary Pinkel was a very data-driven coach. He was very into metrics, and we wanted to switch from the hang clean with our more advanced athletes to doing a velocity based because we had done the research, and Brian Mann had looked at the numbers and realized that once we got strong past a certain point, it was not having a positive correlation to our vertical jumps or our explosiveness. So how are we going to convince the head football coach that we're not going to, with our older guys, our level 3 and 4 athletes, that we don't want to max strength test them. We want to test them on their velocity. And we had to convince him that we hypothesized that if we did that, it will have a positive correlation on our vertical jumps. And then that will have a positive correlation on our 40-yard dash. And then we will have a more explosive and faster team if we made that transition. Now, Coach Pinkel had years and years of data. And I don't mean in his head. I mean in binders. I mean, he would go back and look at 15 years, the previous 15 years of data. And we had the research, we convinced them to, hey, let's try it. And then we produced the results. Now, we had to do a lot of work on the front end in the research to convince them that, hey, this is going to work. And fortunately, we were able to, once we did that, we were able to make more suggestions. So it's kind of like once you have some small victories, then you build that trust, and you can say, Coach, remember when you allowed us to A, now we want to try to do something with B. And that takes time. So I can tell Ernie wants to chime in, but I'm not going to let him chime in. I'm going to switch it up and ask you, Paul. I want to hear about recruiting in sports science. I want to hear about transfer portals, NIL, and what is it like? Are you involved as a sports scientist with recruiting? And if you are, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We certainly are from, I guess you could say at the time, an external facing lens. So, of course, we have a lot of resources, and we're not shy about that. We're going to let that be known to any recruit that steps on our campus, and those that don't. We're going to let people know the resources we have. We're not ashamed of that. I think what we really want the athletes come to our campus to know from a sports science lens is that we're really trying to give them gifts so that they can exercise metacognition, if you will. So they can think about the way their performance is currently going. So they can look at the past and reflect on it, understand what's led them to this point, and then start to hypothesize and increase performance in the future. In essence, what we want to do is instill little mini sports scientists all over our fields, right? And our courts and our pools and everywhere else that we're competing and being challenged. So that's really where we start that conversation. I think it's a really awesome opportunity to kind of plant that seed of, hey, yeah, this is a catapult unit and this is what it does, or this is an aura ring and this is what it does. But it's actually not about that. It's actually not about the number. It's about something else. It's about your performance. And ultimately, it's about giving you the gifts, the tools that you need in order to get the most out of yourself and to reach your fullest potential. So that's kind of like the overarching or underlying message that goes within our recruiting. But we've recently started something here in the face of the changing landscape in college athletics, because you're no longer having to just recruit high school athletes. You're also recruiting your own team because they could go into the portal at any moment. And you're also recruiting athletes from the portal. So we have this massive amount of churn in college athletics that isn't that much different than what you see in free agency in professional sports. So in borrowing some of those concepts, we instituted this year the rapid assessment and monitoring program. So we talked about the scale of Ohio State earlier, 39 opportunities for championships. And that's exactly what we've been doing the last couple of weeks is we just got a large wave of student athletes back on campus. We're lucky here at Ohio State that we do have quite a few athletes that are able to afford and to be afforded the opportunity to stay on in Columbus over the summer. But we get this massive wave of student athletes. And I proposed to our sports science team, I said, hey, look, if professional organizations can scout in an entire NFL, combine class or an NFL class, why can't we understand a full picture of our student athletes' force production and energy system demands and how to advance that athlete within 48 hours of them arriving at campus? Now, admittedly, we fell a little bit short of 48 hours, but within the first 2 weeks, we have an incredible glimpse of what are the strengths and the limitations of all of our student athletes. And more importantly, we're now having collaborative discussions on how should we improve those. So basically, we put into place baseline testing as soon as the athlete gets to campus that incorporates both force production, range of motion, and the metrics for possible future talent identification. And then part of this process was sitting down with every health and performance team or athletic performance team and understanding here's what the pure data is telling us, right? And then here's how we should possibly go about maybe solving some of these problems. Or, hey, we've identified an issue right here. We need to get ahead of this. And that's really been interesting to hear from our dietitians, to hear from our sports medicine professionals, to hear from the sports scientists and the strength and conditioning coaches, all coming together collaboratively around this process. And in reality, it's pretty simple. It seems simple. The scale was pretty hard. We've collected about 15,000 jumps over the last 2 weeks. But it's been really, really interesting to kind of capture that picture, or as best we could, in this year one. And so, that came from this changing landscape of college athletics and the changing and really ever evolving world of sport. And I would wonder, how are you all adapting to this change in NIL and in and transfer portal and all of the different aspects that are, come with collegiate athletics now that weren't there 2 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. How are you all able to stay ahead of the curve? How are you all able to get ahead of those things?
I would love to hear from Ted, because Ted has a lot of interactions at the professional level and collegiate level. And I think, I know he's aware of some things that happen behind the scenes and can't share those things, but I think there's probably some general themes that are happening. So Ted, how do you answer that?
I would say is you have to do, I think, a lot more homework with regard to the portal before you offer. Because what I've seen is you have one team that they sign 5 kids out of the portal for a particular sport, and 4 out of those 5 have to have surgery as soon as they get on campus.
Yeah.
So I think the one area I think you have to do more homework is what's their medical history, and sometimes you just can't rely on getting information from the kid, because if that individual's had surgeries or health issues, somebody in his inner circle, his family, has tweeted it out. They can't help themselves. So I think some of the services that more schools will be utilizing will be independent, third parties that are sort of like internet PIs to find information that you might may not know or be aware of a particular individual.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
interesting. That's exactly how we started the process with every single student athlete. Hey, fill out this survey, tell us about your injury history. And it was really interesting to see how often that differed from the official. Even athletes that were here on campus seem to have perceived more or less injuries, depending on the culture and the organization of their different teams, than what actually may have happened in reality. So I think we may have a study there in and of itself of the perception of injury and being held out of training, and the actual reality of the situation, what someone perceives and what actually happened.
There was one school, this athlete was there for 3 years, and it wasn't until after the 3rd year that they knew he had 1 kidney. So how does that happen?
Yeah, how does that get through the cracks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the medical information that has to be much more transparent and be done on a conference, wide this EMR system that can be shared, because there's just a lot. I think there's a lot of issues there.
Yeah. And what we're finding is that there are so many different, you may run this battery of tests, and there's such a wide and varying outcomes to that, right? Like, so we have objective information going into a system, and it may bucket our athletes into different, areas or lanes, but how do we actually implement solutions for that? Like, it becomes a pretty complicated process. We could write 1,200 individualized programs for every student athlete on campus. That's probably not feasible with our staff ratios. So Ernie, I'd be interested to understand, I've heard a couple of talks from you about decision tree based programming, and I'd be really interested to understand of how you're doing this at the University of Louisville. You all have a large cohort as well. How are you, planning for the individual athlete's needs?
I mean, it's like you said, with all the different sports you have, it varies heavily by sport, and some we're collecting the data and we're not really responding to it in a timely manner to be able to have a positive impact on the athlete. And with some, we're on the brink of really doing some cool things with our baseline assessments and be able to integrate those baseline, like sports medicine assessments, into, say, strength conditioning. So I've been so before we had like machine learning and stuff, decision trees were just a flow chart with branches, dichotomous questions and branches and then those terminals would end in what you're supposed to do. So you start out, this is everyone, and is this or this present? Yes. And then they just branch until you get to the outcome. And okay, when they're there, that's the bucket, but that's also an intervention, and through like Microsoft Excel and software, we've been able to like, do the full loop from collect data and intervene in real time. And that just goes so much further than, oh, we've bucketed all our athletes, but now you still have to do all this manual and heavy lifting in order to actually take action. And quite frankly, no matter how good your athlete management system is, if it's not actually managing the athletes, that's the intervention that comes from the bucketing and the classifications, and then you're falling short and stuff. And so I would say we have some opportunities where, like, we just did a full round of baseline, probably not like you did with ramp at the Ohio State, but I don't know if anyone caught that, but what he said is an acronym ramp, and because Paul likes acronyms, but we've done some baseline testing, and that's a big breakthrough for us because our baseline testing will serve as a opportunity to help guide rehabilitation and decisions around return to play should those athletes ever get hurt. So that's a big milestone because it's one of the first one of those milestones we've had since I've been at Louisville. But now from that, so this is sports medicine baseline testing, but now there's a follow-up meeting with the strength conditioning coach to use decision trees to automate interventions into their regularly occurring strength conditioning programs, so that they don't have to go and do something separate in these separate little interventions with the athletic trainer. So it's a big breakthrough. I'm really proud that that's beginning to happen at Louisville. It's been a long time coming. So there's no question that that's there, but I think that's probably the golden goose in my mind is to be able to collect all that data, but then, like you said, to truly use that information to manage the athlete. But when I say manage, it's not like have a meeting with coaches and health and performance staff to look at data, but it's actually where the data is being used to intervene. And let's take this up to one level higher when we're talking about research and everything. I mean, for me, I described how, we did a little instant expert exercise on travel timing when you're going to altitude, but where I've had my nose in the literature is more on how to affect like organizational change and things like that, and also how to bring data to the table. So we're on the brink of doing something really cool where we're going to use data from evaluations of like how our health and performance teams operate, and then use that information, those evaluations at multiple levels of our organization to now affect positive change within our health and performance teams. So Pat, would you be willing to reveal a little bit about what you've been working on as far as the health and performance team evaluations and how that's going to help guide the health and performance teams and how they can improve their management of athletes?
Yep, I will. And I want to give a quick example to something we were talking about earlier, athletes on campus. Over 20 years ago, I had an athlete that came in, and he arrived that summer, because that long ago, that's when athletes actually arrived, was during the summertime. And getting ready to have him do some bench press and some other things. And he says, "Coach, I can't bench press." It's like, why not? He said, "I have Erb's palsy." It's like, I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. And you look, and he actually had one arm that was probably 3/4 the size of the other one, maybe a little smaller. And he was a running back, very explosive, 40+ inch vertical. And we went to the recruiting coach and the position coach, like, do you know we signed a running back that has Erb's palsy? It's like, he will not be able to carry the ball in one of his arms. And they were like, "What are you talking about?" No one knew. We're like, well, we're not going to be able to, we said we can't hang clean. I think we can squat him. Yeah, we should be able to squat him. Can you squat? Yeah, I can squat, coach. Okay. No bench press. But we got hammer machines, so he can load up on one side and he could still use the side that was impacted, but we had to do it on machine. So, and but we couldn't do hang clean, so we had him do the shuttle MVP and super explosive. So I never forgot about that what are we doing in a process that an athlete shows up, and not that he should not have been recruited, but we had no plan. And fortunately we were able to come up with 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 a with a training process that helped him to be successful. But even receiving a handoff, he had to receive it a certain way. We had to teach, hey, coaches, if you plan on doing a certain type of handoff with this athlete, it's not going to work. So I thought that was interesting. So back to your question, the H&P evals, something that we have started to do, and we're working on this process, is how do we get our health and performance team? So a health and performance team, and Paul, you were the first one to actually present on the health and performance teams. We actually have 24 health and performance teams. We have the directors and then one around each sport. And what we have done now is we have the H&P team evaluating others in the H&P team. We have the head coaches evaluating the health and performance team. We have the sport administrators that we're going to start rolling out so they evaluate their health and performance team, because that's how it's working in collegiate athletics. Sport administrators are starting to be called on more like general managers for sports. And we also have the student athlete survey. So we've always done student athlete exit surveys, but we're going to start doing mid-season and post-season surveys with student athletes. And that's going to be a part of our comprehensive evaluation process. We have examples of how health and performance meetings should occur. So we want the coaches involved, sport administrators involved, and the health and performance team, along with team physicians, involved. And we want feedback from the athletes on their experience. And this involves everyone that is student athlete facing. And this is what our athletes, we call it comprehensive and integrated approach to training athletes and performance. But we also have to make sure that that the education and the evaluation is a part of the process.
Now, Ernie and Pat, with regard to, some of these customized interventions based off your assessments, what's the learning process for the strength coaches now? They probably have to spend more time prepping the room before the team comes in to account for some of these individualized, protocols that will be implemented within a group setting. What's been their biggest challenge?
Well, I think for us, staffing is not a problem, but I think you're going to have that issue at some universities. I would imagine that's not from a resource standpoint, that's not an issue at Ohio State, but staffing is an issue. We were able to use a lot of interns and GAs in the past, and I think there's limitations with that now, being able to use that type of personnel. There's a push towards using only full-time employees. So, and then some may have equipment limitations. Fortunate for us, we have equipment that is very modular, so we can, set up and break down different exercises in stations and keep the athletes kind of, stationary in terms of where they are located in the weight room, and that helps more with management. It's tough because even with the progression we were having with having different types of levels of programming, now with the transfer portal, you have athletes coming in at different times of the year, coming from different backgrounds of programs. Some programs are more advanced than others. So there's the training age, there is the chronological age. It's just all over the place now. So the strength coaches are spending more time to get up to speed faster. And that, the NFL coaches are kind of used to that, but there's still a window of when you're getting athletes in. And in college, it seems like it's happening year round when athletes are entering and leaving the program. So I think that's a challenge. to know who's showing up, being ready for them, developing a training program that's going to meet them where they're at, and then progress them. I think college athletics, in its terms of strength and conditioning, are going to have to spend more time on in-season development, because off-season is time for transition and change.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, I would say that here at Ohio State, like we're very blessed in terms of our resources, facilities wise, but staff wise, like we are such a large sport organization with so many teams competing that the ratios look the same as or similar to what you would see at the University of Louisville or other schools because we have those 36 varsity sports. So really, yeah, there is quite a heavy burden on the strength and conditioning coach, but at the same time, I would put that back of uh my direct supervisor, Tyler Carpenter. He has a quote in his office, and I think it's so fitting to this answer here. He said, it says, I'm at my heart, I'm a teacher. Like if we're not equipping these young men and women to be able to learn how to maintain and advance their own body and their own performance, then what are we really doing here? Like I think we're here to invest in these student athletes and give them some skills for the rest of their life. And part of that might be learning how to read and decipher a workout and set up their own workout for the day. So that has been one strategy, but certainly there are still coaches that will set everything up and have everything set out for their student athletes. But I think at times that can be a disservice. Can you read this, interpret it, and then be self-sufficient?
Well, we're coming up on the end of our time here. So, Paul, do you have anything else to share? And then Ted's going to close us out.
I don't think I have anything else to share. I don't think I ever came into this situation to share, really to learn from the three of you. I think I would be silly not to try to take advantage of that opportunity. I am just incredibly humbled, to have worked side by side with all three of you now at this point. It's just a testament to, I think we often confuse luck and talent in this industry. And I've just been so lucky to get to work with the people that I have.
So, Paul, what reading recommendations you have for our listeners?
Ooh, that is a good question. So right now I am reading Bowling Alone. So it is a book about the degradation of the American social network and how that's kind of slid over the last couple decades. And I found it an incredibly interesting read. I think also, I'm big on reading outside of the industry in terms of entertainment. So I would always recommend that you do literature reviews, that you're doing your instant expert exercises. One a week, I heard, keeps the doctor away. Or maybe you become a doctor after one a week, something like that. So I would always recommend that you're doing, deep dives or maybe small miniature dives into the literature. But I would say Bowling Alone. And then I just read The Algebra of Wealth by Professor Scott Galloway, which I found was incredibly impactful. It's just a very straightforward lessons in financial wisdom and advice.
Well, Paul, thank you so much. I'm writing that down, those books. Appreciate you. I hope this is not offensive, but we're real proud of you. Just to know where you've come from in terms of your growth and development, and just your professionalism is just awesome. So we're grateful to know you and humble with your presence as well. So thank you. We really appreciate you. Dr. Ted, Dr. Ernie, thank you all so much. This has been another good one. And hey, let's keep making a difference.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate you coming on, Paul. This is an awesome milestone.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for the opportunity.